دايما يقولوا لي اتحرك الناحية دي وانا ما فيش عندي مجال. خليني ازق دي كده لو لا ادتني فرصة اهي.
This is perfect, Dr. Jamal. Jazakallahu khairan. Thank you.
وإياك موصلنا كويس كده؟
Yes, perfect.
طيب.
ربنا يكرمك. شكرا، ربنا يكرم حضرتك.
الله يكرمك، جزاك الله خير.
إياكم إن شاء الله.
المهم مش باين قدامي الشحن وصل لغايه كام.
السلام عليكم دكتور جمال.
وعليكم السلام اخ وجدي، بارك الله فيك، كيف حالكم؟
الله يكرمك في الدنيا والاخره ان شاء الله، نورتنا دائما ومشتاقون.
شكر الله لك وبارك فيكم
جميعا. We miss you and we love you and we respect you.
Same here. الحمد لله.
الله يكرمك ان شاء الله. دكتور يوسف, are you there?
حياكم الله. I am here. Allah bless you.
May Allah bless you. You don't want to be in the video?
I would love to, either way, whatever you like. I think.
Yeah, I would love to have a video so the community and everybody knows who our young scholar here.
Allah, I think Dr. Jamal's duty is already sufficient.
Inshallah, but your beauty will be great in the footsteps of Dr. Jamal Badawi. What a beautiful.
Allah يحفظكم. حياكم الله.
حسن ظنكم.
Inshallah. I think we are ready to broadcast Sahar. So with great pleasure, we would love to introduce our great scholar, Dr. Jamal Badawi, in a conversation in fiqh issues, Islamic jurisprudence. And Dr. Yusuf Wanli will be introducing, Dr. Jamal Badawi. I have the honor to introduce Dr. Yusuf Wanli, is a young scholar that's been raised and grew up here in Portland, in Corvallis, Oregon. I've known Yusuf since a young man, you know, and we are really proud of Yusuf and his contribution to the growth of the Muslim community, the American Muslim community. Yusuf is a young healer and a young unifier. We are blessed to have you, Yusuf, and we are blessed to have Dr. Jamal Badawi. Before I give the mic, you know, to Yusuf, Dr. Jamal Badawi, I'm sure you have heard this before from me, but you have been an important factor, you know, one of 5 that have influenced me very much in what I am today, in everything that we do here. It's your work, and may Allah bless you and reward you for always being a balanced voice of Islam and a moderate voice of Islam, a loving voice, a caring voice, the true voice of Islam. You and Dr. Ahmed Saqr, rahmatullah alayhi, may Allah bless Dr. Saqr, and Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui, and Dr. Sharifa Al-Khatib, the late Sharif Al-Khatib, may Allah bless her soul, and so many others beside my mother and so many other members of my family. May Allah bless you and reward you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our most merciful, the most compassionate, will give you the ultimate reward. Dr. Yusuf, what a blessing to join us tonight. May Allah bless you. Go ahead, Dr. Yusuf.
Actually, my father was telling me, I was just speaking to Dr. Jamal before we proceeded here, that in Sacramento as a young boy, Dr. Jamal, he actually carried me and hugged me. So now, subhanAllah, how time has changed, and now I get a chance to have the opportunity to interview such a beacon of hope and piety and facilitation of goodness. May the Almighty bless and elevate his status in this life and the next. I think that many of the brothers here, the brothers in the States and the sisters in the United States, grew up watching many of his lectures, his debates, his reading his books, his letters, all for the purpose to find out answers to the questions that many of us think of and face. And that is why I believe we have gathered today to wrestle with some of those questions that are very much prevalent and facing us today with the month of Ramadan at hand.
Go ahead, Brother Yusuf.
Okay, Doctor and Sheikh Wajdi, shall we proceed, inshallah?
Yeah, go ahead and proceed.
Dr. Jamal, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. When we read traditional fiqh books and we open up on the chapter of Ramadan, we tend to find the discussion about ru'yatul qamar, the sighting of the moon, and the discussions that revolve around it for the advent of Ramadan. May you please elaborate on such a subject?
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah, and to all my beloved brothers and sisters, Ramadan Mubarak to you all. On the question of the determination of the beginning and end of Ramadan, also for that matter, this has been discussed in many conferences, in many meetings. I just like to really give a brief answer because I'm sure some of you might have more contemporary questions as to, for example, fasting under the present situation of the corona. So I'll be very brief. First of all, I must say that the number one, from adabul ikhtilaf, from the etiquette of differing opinions, is that even if one prefer one legitimate interpretation over the other, it should be done also with respect to the other opinion that you consider to be marjuh, yani that there is a better one. So this is one thing. And secondly, never to personalize difference in juridical matters. As we know, some of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, they differed in opinion, but they were very, very brotherly. They praised one another in spite of their difference in details. Number three, there is a rule also in usul, in the Islamic juridical theory, or that I'd say it first in Arabic, al-hukmu ala al-shay far'un min tasawwurih. To judge a particular matter is only a branch of your imagination or perception of it. Now, there are things in the Quran that, from the standpoint of the definitive meaning versus probabilistic meaning, there are things that are clearly thawab, things that are permanent, unchanged, unchangeable. But there are also, even in the Quran, not only hadith. There is some sada. Maybe I should turn my mic off. Oh, but you can't hear me. Okay, because there is some kind of echo. There are things that some people might look at the ayah, like, for example, يسألونك عن الأهلة قل هي مواقيت للناس والحج. The Quran refers to the moon or moon sighting, or more accurately, crescent, the birth of the moon, that these are to help us determine the time. And then you find also in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, صوموا لرؤيته وأفطروا لرؤيته. Now, even aside from anything pertaining to science, is that sighting of the moon, which is legitimate, no question about that, and traditionally it has been done for hundreds of years, is the sighting itself, sighting process, an act of ibadah, not nafil, even fard. And if so, even what does seeing or sighting the hilal means? Many scholars, for example, said that what is meant really is the beginning of the lunar month. And since not many people were at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and for a long time, were not aware of the very definitive calculation and hisab of the phases of the moon. But then they differ even. See with, how do you see? You see with the naked eye, you see with the help of things like telescopes, you see with electronic telescopes, because everyone would have its own understanding. So what is really, as Sheikh alayhi rahmatullah, I have his book here.
Ahmed Shakir.
لا في كمان in Lebanon, Sheikh he used to be the mufti. My age sometimes make it different. Forgive me for that. Anyway, he has a book also on Siyam, and he says that the illah for fasting is not sighting, but the beginning of the lunar month. Seeing also could be not necessarily with the eye, because I say, do you see? He say, yeah, I see. I could even close my eye and see, meaning to realize something, to be aware of something. And then we find some people like Sheikh Ahmad Shakir, alayhi rahmatullah, early on, he said that sighting of the moon is not an ends, but a means of realization of the beginning of the month of any month, any lunar month, actually, for that matter. And he said he was, because he was living in a time when more and more information about astronomy and calculations was, he said, sighting is probabilistic. In other words, some people report seeing the moon, but they perhaps, if they're not trained, they might be looking at some other luminous body in the skies. If they're not aware, they don't know exactly which direction should you look to sight the moon. So he said that there could be problems sometimes with sighting the hilal. Whereas he argues, and apparently he was aware that the calculation now, astronomical calculation, is different from the past people reach the moon even. So basically, he argues that calculation is now definitive. Maybe it wasn't every time like that in the past. And he said you cannot really reject the probabilistic and replace, you cannot reject the definitive, i.e. calculation, and depend on the probabilistic or less definitive on that. So to make the long story short, there have been many conferences in North America. For example, the Fiqh Council had several consulting actually astronomers. The most famous is Dr. Khalid Chaukat. There was also a brother, I think he was working with NASA in the West Coast. So several people were consulted on that matter. There were a number of international conferences. One of the relatively recent one was in Istanbul, where they invited people from a variety of schools of jurisprudence. And they had also consulting astronomers. And actually, it was concluded that scientifically speaking, there could be no argument about the conjunction point. Conjunction meaning when the moon, the sun, and earth are on the same line, okay? That means you cannot see anything. But the moon is not static. It gradually, incrementally, disappear or incrementally get born. So they said it is at that moment, the Sheikh Shakir say, walau bilahza, if that happens, for example, after sunset, even for a moment, then the month is deemed to have begun. There have been a great deal of acceptance after many people were, not, again, they did not fully understand either the Sharia part or the astronomical part, or in some cases, neither, because this is the way we were used to do it all the time, that they say. So with this, there had been a growth of acceptance. In North America, when the Fiqh Council said that, all right, we will adopt the astronomical calculation with some qualifiers, of course, that the astronomers say which angle in the sky, so that because the moon might be there but cannot be seen because there must be such an angle. The time lag between sunsets and moonsets and so on. And anyway, so they established, many people were uncomfortable with that. And I hear some people even, again, contrary to the adabul ikhtilaf, they say, no, this is bid'ah, this is kalam. And you don't, say about qualified scholars from different parts of the world because you prefer a different opinion. So the conclusion, we should accept that with the difference legitimate. We don't say, all right, it is my way or the highway, or if you don't follow my interpretation, you're either loose in your interpretation, or you're making bid'ah, or the other accusation, you're not flexible, you're so strict about it. In fact, I don't know, I didn't want to get into that for a long period of time, but I just refer to one incident that you both know. When the Prophet ﷺ after Uhud asked the Sahaba said, don't pray Asr except in Bani Qurayza. They started marching on the way. Apparently it took them longer than expected. So the sun was beginning to decline and Maghrib was very close. So they discussed among themselves. Some people said, no, the Prophet ﷺ said a clear command, maybe has some wisdom we don't understand. Don't pray unless, meaning even if you go there after Maghrib and we miss us, we follow the Prophet. Can anyone fault their intention? The others are said, no. When the Prophet say that, he meant, or we can interpret it as meaning, go fast, go fast, try to reach there so that you can pray us on time. And they argued further that the evidence from the Quran, إن الصلاة كانت على المؤمنين كتابا موقوتا, Allah require us to pray Salah in its proper time. So both of them differ. So some prayed, some didn't. They didn't start a big fight with one another. And when they came back to the Prophet ﷺ, they told him, he did not reproach any of them. Of course, you might say, okay, I would be more inclined to understand the maqsad, the intention of the Prophet ﷺ, other texts in Quran and Hadith about, حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى. Don't miss Salah. Many ulama interpret that al-wusta, which Salatul Asr. But the Prophet didn't blame one or the other. So this was an excellent example. And they still were brothers and loving to one another. So I hope نتجاوز the details of that. And I hope if you have questions, perhaps on the current issues, and there are many very sensitive issues like praying Jama'ah, praying Taraweeh in the face of the closures of mosques and so on. But I'm not putting things in your mind. I mean, enough for the Ramadan.
Allah bless you, Dr. Jamal. Allah bless you. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, Dr. Jamal, just one last point in connection to this as we proceed. One of the worries many of the Muslim populations, they fear about the opinion that is adopted by a number of scholars you had mentioned, which is the calculational based, astronomical based, is the fear that it doesn't have a salaf to it, a fear that maybe the earlier generations up until Ahmed Shakir in 1939 proclaimed his positions. However, when we read some fiqh books, we do find that though it was abnormal, there were some scholars from the earlier periods that inclined towards a form of astronomical calculations, such as Ibn Zurayj, for example, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid. So can you address this particular point? May Allah bless you.
Jazakallah khair. Okay, like I said, the main feature about the new opinion, relatively recent opinions, is not only the development of astronomy in a way that became extremely precise, that we are told that you can really predict let's say the astronomical birth. Okay, when, like I said, the three planets would be in the same line. Shortly after that, the movement is dependent on ability to sight and which part in the world you are. That birth is actually universal for the whole world. That's one thing. Secondly, it is not only one scholar. I remember the name of the Sheikh Faisal Mawlawi. He was Qadi Sharaf in Lebanon, and he was also a member of the European Council of Fatwa and Research, and he lived both in Lebanon and in France for sometimes we developed a better understanding. So that's the other thing, that you could also go back to the text. When you read in Surah Al-Rahman, الشمس والقمر بحسبان, and as I remember, some mufassirin take husban meaning not only calculation, but husban, very accurate calculation. So we cannot say we have all respect for Salaf, but did they have all these detailed information? Number one. Number two, it is not only the matter of Sheikh Mawlawi alone or Sheikh Shakir or many others. Actually, a fatwa that is more collective fatwa is perhaps to be trusted more than saying يعني كل يؤخذ من قوله ورد. These are human beings, but errors are reduced considerably when actually you get, like in the conference I mentioned to you, in senior scholars from various parts debating this. Also, the same kind of debate took place in much earlier here in the Islamic, the North American fiqh council. So there are bases also actually for this. So when we say our respect of Salaf, we do not take it as, every small interpretation. The Salaf did not determine the time of prayers with clocks or watches like today. Okay, it wasn't available. So the Salaf used to have this stick, stick something in the ground and measure. Nobody's doing that anymore. The Salaf did not use microphones for adhan. But is it contrary to the Salaf or demeaning them or any way that microphones was used? I say that because it happened. I heard somebody tell me that in India, when the microphones came, some people were very against. They say this is a matter of ibadah, this is bid'ah, because they did not understand at the time that azan is not meant for the sake of azan. And now with big cities where you need to reach more people, you're having another means. So the ruling, the maqasid is still there, but the tools to achieve that could change with time. So there's sometimes of mixing between things that are fixed and things that are subject to more than one interpretation, between the principle that could not be violated and details that might change from time to time.
Is it safe to say, Allah bless you, that those scholars that adopt the calculation method are following the process of the Salaf by doing so? Meaning the tools they used, the similar ideas and tools they attempted to try to figure out what is most best for al-istihsan, for example.
Okay, you used a very important word, Brother Yusuf, when he said process. Islam is not a matter of process. There is a difference between the objective and the process, between the ends and the means of achieving that end, like the question of adhan using the microphone. And if we were only to use the process of the Salaf, then we will be required to have a stick with us to determine the dhill. And nobody objected. And I don't know, tell me now, in spite of argument about using the clock or a stick, it became widely accepted by all the scholars. So process might change, means may change. Example, the Salaf used to, when they pay Zakat al-Fitr, they give it in grain, or foodstuff, dates, whatever, barley. All right, if somebody say we'll follow the Salaf, then it means that when I get Zakat al-Fitr or some group or organization, they would be required to have a few trucks. Imagine a city like Cairo, 10 million people, perhaps more, and you go distribute that. It becomes, so here we're not really demeaning the Salaf, may Allah bless them all. This was the means available to them, and they were like neighborhood. It's very easy to do that, but to do that today is perhaps very impractical. So the means or process here, that's why many ulama, I know some Hanabila say, no, you have to do it. Fine, if they do that, we don't attack them, which is Jazakumullah khair. They're using, Allah reward them for loving the Salaf and following the Salaf. But others say we are following the Salaf in terms of their maqasid, but we're using a more practical mean. I mean, that's why in most fiqh book now, it is permissible to pay Zakat al-Fitr in money. And they argue further that it is not the matter of grain, but aghnum. And it's not only food. Maybe the person needs Zakat al-Fitr to buy clothes or something else.
Allah bless you, Dr. Jamal. When we move on in the process of fiqh and we look to earlier text about those as Ramadan comes about, in which fasting is a compulsion upon, they tend to mention that sometimes there is an istisna due to physical inabilities or health, etc. In the age of the coronavirus, what are your thoughts upon people, for example, preemptively breaking their fast out of fear of having a reduction in their immune system, a weak immune system?
Again, when you talk about the process of fiqh, a lot of people seem to just refer to his shaykh or the shaykh of his madhab, some of that nature. Jazahumullah khair for their ijtihad, but from the usuli standpoint, the proper methodology of interpretation, one would go first to the Quran to see if you can get the answer. If we don't find the answers in the Quran, but when I say the Quran, not picking one ayah that suits one opinion, taking all the ayat in the Quran that deal with one subject. If we don't find that, then we can go to the sound hadith or sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We might find the answers there. If we're lacking in all of these, then it is ijtihad. This methodology actually was the one established by the Prophet ﷺ himself when he sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal, to Yemen. So that's the problem. And of course, looking after that to opinion of ulama, pros and cons, and those who are educated, like the ulama, for example, they can compare the dalil and so on. And there is no harm at all if they make interpretation, especially if it's a collective type of interpretation. So to answer that question, based on this methodology, if we look at the ayat of Siyam in Surah Al-Baqarah, Siyam is definitely, you might say, fard. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam. So it is ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, is the corona really something totally new in terms of excuses or rukhas? No, not really, because the Quran itself even answered that as well. You find two ayah. In one case it says, فَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. So that refers to the issue of illness, that a person, if he doesn't have like a permanent issue or problem that he does not expect to be cured from it, if he is just sick at the time when Ramadan comes, then it means that you can make up for the days that you missed. Now, ala safarin, the Quran left it open. And maridan, the Quran also did not specify what illness is. I like something I read recently of one of the greatest usuli scholars in North Africa, Sheikh Tahir bin Ashur. He says the mashaqqa would be like 3 levels. One is something just inconvenient. Yeah, you have a little headache, for example, when fasting. That is tolerable. Of course, that does not seem to be a good justification to break the barakah of fasting in Ramadan. And then he said there are things that are very certain that if indeed you fast in your case or your situation, it could either cause damage to your health, threaten your life, or delay your cure because you cannot take your medication. By the way, taking medication, sometimes you can work around, like if you take it twice a day, you can have one at suhoor time and one after, but it is left to the conscience of the individual. But he says there could be difficulty really of the in-between. So in that case, and again, benefiting from the scientific knowledge that we have, when people ask me on that, I said, check with your physician, preferably a Muslim physician, so that he can appreciate the importance of fasting. Yet some scholars also say, but if you trust, there is no Muslim physician, for example, and you have one who's not Muslim, but he's fair, and you explain to him, then So basically, what I'm saying, one case of mashaqqa, in that case, constituting danger to your life, in that case, no problem at all. You can take the instruction from your physician. But let's apply it now to the, because I think this might be behind that question. There are issues with corona in particular that has been somewhat unprecedented. Not that there was no plagues in the past at the time of the Sahaba, and even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, because, or he referred to that in the hadith, which is very interesting, what we call it, again, the isolation, that if ta'un, or that is highly contagious diseases, appear in a city, don't get out of it and don't get into it. This is perfect. What people talk about scientific discovery has already been said by the Prophet ﷺ. But it is unprecedented in the sense that, number one, and I'm not a scientist, but I watch a lot of these things and hear experts, especially on the CNN and Al Jazeera, that this particular virus is very puzzling. It is unlike any other virus, like the influenza and other things. The scientists are not able to understand how did it jump from animal to human, but that happened with others. But they don't understand how does it operate, and what explained the exponential growth of it. That's why so far there's all kind of attempts, and millions are being spent in different countries to find out any possible cure for that. They experimenting, but nobody claimed. And if you want to be scientific of a claimed cure, you don't say, no, my mind tell me that. It has to follow science. It has to go through a long period of experimentation. Otherwise, you might be hurting people when indeed your intention is to help them. So using that, furthermore, even inoculation, which could help a lot, has not been proven yet. So there are more, I heard that dozens of attempts to develop this. But if you follow science, you need several months. So if somebody comes before that and say, oh, there have been some promise, you don't make control group as really any scientific experiment required, you could be hurting people. So this is unique in that sense. And maybe that was one of the reasons behind several scholarly groups like the Fiqh Council of North America, the European Council of Fatwa and Research, and many other scholars who understood those facts about it, especially like in European Council invited 4 doctors. One of them is a specialist even in epidemiology. Once you have that understanding that even a breath, a droplet, even that inadvertently fall on the carpet in the masjid is enough to infect. Secondly, it is well known that that virus requires a sort of, hadana, that you might say, incubation period. And they say that people who they call asymptomatic, that means they look healthy, they don't show any signs, whereas indeed they are carriers of that virus in the stage of incubation, which means a person could say, no, I'm okay. So I go to the masjid, and you could be infecting other people. Yeah. So because of that, some people started to argue, because it is so dangerous, why don't we then not fast? My answer to that is not my own. There have been several scientific studies made by, I have actually one article that has a scholar, specialist, and he referred to other scholars dealing with the question of fasting. And there are two myths that were dismissed. One, that if you don't break the fast, you will not, you will get infected. The answer is no. You could get infected inadvertently from your wife, your spouse, your friend who is asymptomatic. So that's a myth. Secondly, they say that some people, yes, indeed, some doctors, for example, tell you that one of the precautionary measures that you can take in general, not Ramadan, in general, is to keep drinking water, a little bit of water every 15 minutes, okay? But they don't tell you that you will get the bug if you don't. This is because they talk about variety of precautionary measures, such as, having the various other measures and social distancing and so on. But they said that there is no evidence. Secondly, some people said, if you're fasting will reduce your immunity. And immunity, of course, as everybody knows, is very crucial in fighting infections or any disease, really, for that matter. Again, in that article, repeatedly, it is claimed that fasting does not reduce your immunity. There might be some, but I want to be very cautious. But in other words, there are lots of evidence that it does not. But there are some studies even, but it's not universal, that says, on the contrary, your immunity is better even in the matter of fasting. I know there have been lots of argument on that, but I hope that, again, in reference to collective ijtihad, the same results independently was arrived at by the Fiqh Council North America, European Council, Fatwa and Research, and many other groups for that matter.
Allah bless you, Dr. Jamal. Can you direct a message to the medical practitioners that are working during the time of Ramadan, and direct some advice and also a discussion on their fast if it inhibits their work ethic, etc., as you just talked about? Allah bless you.
Okay, well, first of all, my humble word to the physicians and other nurses and other people in the medical professions, to say Jazakumullah khair, may Allah bless you. We have seen over and over again that they're working almost 24/7 to the point of extreme exhaustion. But more importantly, they're dealing with patients who are inflicted with this very highly contagious virus. In spite even of the so-called PPE, that the personal protection equipment, which of course there have been lots of shortage in many countries on that. But even if they use that, in spite of their knowledge, still many get infected and they suffer. Thirdly, we've heard of lots of medical people, including doctors particularly, who died, may Allah consider them shaheeds, because they deal in that dangerous situation. In UK, I heard several Muslims, at least heard of 4 or 6 Muslims, and the same thing you will find perhaps everywhere. In Italy, in the northeast part, where it was really very bad, very hot spot, according to media report, they say about 61 doctors not got infected and cured, died as a result of that. May Allah reward those who put their life even on the line. So one advice also, of course, that yes, we all depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we have نأخذ بالأسباب. We have also to take all measures for protection. So maybe they learned it the hard way, maybe sometimes because of the lack of sufficient PPEs, protection equipment, which is of course a problem with the governments, with people also who took advantage of people in this very dangerous thing. So they put this equipment, exaggerated in the price. So I said, our beloved people in the medical profession, may Allah bless you. We all appreciate you, and to all doctors in general, and we make dua for you. But in the second place, the Quran teaches us, خُذُوا حِذْرَكُمْ. There is no contradiction between tawakkul and hadar, between depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trusting in Allah, and also being cautious. And that's why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaks about, as we mentioned, that if this contagious diseases, waba, appear in a city, don't enter and don't leave if you're inside. So these are precautions, and precautions are not the opposite of depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You might remember the beautiful hadith when the person who came to the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he tied his horse, did not tie his horse. You know what I mean? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, tie it. He said, no, I depend on Allah. The Prophet said, اعقلها وتوكل. Tie it first and then depend on Allah. So there's no contradiction. Thirdly, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them immensely, but they should take all precautions possible, depend on Allah, and maybe in the eyes of Allah, if someone take all these precautions and sacrifice, put himself in that danger, that inshallah would be one form of shahada to Allah subhanahu. And the other thing, of course, that they should help their community understand.
Dr. Bilal, Dr. Jamal, حياكم الله. Now, with regard to this particular matter, we're talking about the coronavirus, Ramadan, health practitioners, fear, fasting, etc. We know that one of the customary practices of the Muslims of old from antiquity is to pray the Taraweeh prayer in congregation. We also understand that Imam Malik approached it slightly differently based upon a number of his instructors. He used to prefer to pray at home if he or the prayer or the individual had the ability to do so. What are your thoughts of the 5 daily prayers, the Taraweeh prayer, and the actions of a family at home in Ramadan in the age of the Corona?
Okay, it's good. That last statement is very important. In the age of Corona, a highly contagious and oftentimes fatal disease. We're talking about North America, about what, 180,000, maybe more than that even. Worldwide, it comes in the millions even. So it is a very dangerous one, and we don't have a definitive tried medication to look after that. So we're really talking about a situation which is extremely difficult. That's why the fatwa, for example, of the European Council of Fatwa and Research, actually, with the help also of physicians that were consulted in the beginning, they said it is very dangerous. It's risk the life of people. For example, it is enough, for example, that someone who appeared to be very healthy, but he's still in the period of incubation. There is no other symptom appear. And just a small droplet like that on a carpet is enough for a person making sajda there to do. So here we're talking about not only a rule that is well known in Sharia, of course, that one has to keep in mind not to hurt others. For example, when the Prophet ﷺ said that if the al-waba, ta'un, generally you talk about, similar kind of contagious diseases appear in one place, don't enter, and if you're inside, don't leave. For that virus, it is very devastating, very difficult, and that is reflected in the magnitude of fatalities, even within a short period of time, on the level of countries, and of course, on the global level. So I just have to qualify that to understand that it's not something to be taken lightly. And like I say, for example, because I was present with the meeting of the European Council of Fatwa and Research, of course, online, and we had like 4 physicians to discuss that matter and ask them questions. So it was not lightly arrived at. So to come specifically to your question here, the closures of the masjids to prevent spread of the disease is absolutely needed. That's one point. Secondly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. Don't throw yourself in a situation where you'll be unnecessarily losing your life. And we have seen that already. It is a very devastating one, and we don't really have a complete solution to that. So given that danger, actually the fatwa, both of the Fiqh Council of North America and the European Council of Fatwa and Research, said that out of necessity, because preservation of life is one of the main maqasid of Islamic Sharia. But it is not at the sacrifice of deen, because deen will continue with us or without us. It is a precaution to maintain life, and only on a temporary type of basis. This is what I have to say about that. And real experience now showed the validity of that. We all pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove that test from us.
Allah bless you, Doctor. The young brothers and sisters, they are very inclined to the subject of eschatology, the study of the last days, alamat as-sa'a, al-kubra wal-sughra. And they read verses like هل ينظرون إلا أن تأتيهم الملائكة أو يأتي ربك أو يأتي بعض آيات ربك. And they go to Ibn Kathir, al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, and at the end of the book there is, as you know, he talks about alamat as-sa'a, etc. So they come across prophetic traditions that talk about, from among the signs, that al-Hajj would be postponed, from among the signs, the subject of waba and diseases becoming widespread. The question that are on the mind of many of these young brothers and sisters: are we in the last days? Are these signs of the last days? How should a heart of Muslim be in this particular time? Please address this question. Allah bless you.
You too, yeah. Okay. When we speak about alamat as-sa'a, as you know, there are minor ones and there are major ones. Major ones are beginning with that. Nobody will miss that, really. It would be really quite clear, and the alamat are quite distinct. But I think what we address now is al-alamat as-sughra. Alamat as-sughra is definitely something like you said, people would have diseases that was not known to the people before them. So we can't jump and say, oh no, that refers to this disease or that disease. So as-sughra could apply in different places, different times, but still does not reach alamat as-sa'a al-kubra. So we could say that might be sughra, but for several years, actually, for decades, you can see what might qualify as alamat as-sughra. Okay, many of the evil that this minor signs speak about was repeated several times in history. And if we were to take the shortcut, what happened with some people used to say, the hour would be at 2018, something like that. And 2003 comes and goes and is still there. So these are general signs which can actually come in stages, could continue for quite a long time, but the real ones really is alamat al-sa'a. But dwelling on that too much is only useful when we remember that if we live long enough until the major signs begins, لا ينفع نفسا إيمانها قد آمنت من قبل أو كسبت في إيمانها خيرا. Once you get that to that stage, خلاص. So you could go in that period of minor signs for decades, in fact. But while it might be useful to discuss that, it may not be very useful to dwell on it because the clearer signs is ahead of us. We have not come close to that. There might be some signs already. So leave that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the main thing, like I used to be taught in Boy Scouts and so on, kun musta'iddan, be ready. Remember that. And this trials of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also to remind us, be ready. It reminds us, don't keep just grabbing money and this and that. What will happen to you if that will end your life in virtually no time?
People are passing away. You had talked about how right now in the States, we're almost at 45,000 individual souls who have passed away. In the world, it's reaching in the hundreds of thousands. In the subject of Islam, we have ritualistic practices we perform out of respect to the deceased and their body and their circumstances. How should the Islamic communities approach Taqsir al-Mayyit, the preparation of the deceased and the burial and the ceremonial rites, in a time in which some of our interactions are limited, particularly if the deceased, God bless him and or her, had passed away due to the virus?
Okay. There is a scientific point, and there is also a Sharia part, and they are inseparable, by the way, because good interpretations has to be based on the reality of the situation. And the contingencies is a matter also in our Sharia. For example, إِلَّا مَا اضْطُرِرْتُمْ إِلَيْهِ, in the case of eating pork or something. اضْطُرِرْتُمْ إِلَيْهِ means you are going to die or eat that. And again, temporarily, only until the difficulty is mitigated. Now, with this understanding, the scientific base would be very important. And you see, there is a basic rule in Usul, I'm sure many of you know it better than I do. Allow me to say it in Arabic first. الحكم على الشيء فرع من تصوره. To rule on any matter, it's only a branch of how you perceive it or understand it. And in response, the real incident that happened recently in several Muslim countries, that people did not appreciate that this is a very vicious and new type of virus, that there is no complete cure for it. They try everything, but there is no, the people might all of a sudden get the fever and signs that take the person to the hospital, and sometimes it's a matter of 24 hours. Some people would go. So it's very, very serious. Those who do not have that understanding, they might liken it to some other disease here or there, but this actually is quite different, to the point that ideally speaking, and again, like I said, we consulted, some physicians. With one, I think, was an epidemiologist who appeared in Al Jazeera recently. So that's his field. And others also have very close knowledge also of that even a droplet from the deceased could actually contract the disease. And the disease is devastating and it takes time. Look at some people. I heard there was a big conference in I think, was it in Malaysia? And people did not heed that. And they misunderstood. Tawakkal ala Allah, depend on Allah. Because the Prophet ﷺ told that person who wants to leave his camel out without time, he said, "Aqilha wa tawakkal." Do what you can by tie it and make tawakkul. It's not the opposite. And maybe they could not understand the seriousness of that disease. We cannot blame them because, like I said earlier, there is a rule. To rule on something is a branch of how do you perceive it. They did not perceive it with that danger, and in some cases, of course, there were negative sequences for that. I think you heard about, I don't know whether I mentioned that, several physicians in Britain, alayhim rahmatullah, groups, that at least the ones we heard about earlier. So it's a very devastating type of disease. And for that reason, you find that those who have been a little bit lax and did not understand that, for example, the huge ijtima' tabligh, that I think it was in Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of people later on got infected. It's very serious. Not because they neglected, but they did not appreciate it, and they thought it's something that, just like the flu, well, we have people dying from the flu every year, so it's different. The best practices, as we learned from the physician, really, is to, number one, don't come close to a person infected except with the utmost possible PPEs, the personal protection equipment. And like I said, even doctors who have been doing that, sometimes infection. Secondly, you take precaution, of course, so distance that you're keeping from the person unless you have to examine. These measures, strictness of these measures that apply both to the physicians, the nurses, even the other people helping with physical cleanliness and so on. To protect these people, you have to really have the proper equipment, at least those who deal with the people who are sick. And they said it is very devastating because they don't fully understand yet how does it operate and why does it spread that fast. It is unlike flus or other things that we had in the past. And the speed, amazing speed with which it spreads, not only for people with pre-existing conditions like, heart problems, diabetes, or a combination, old age or something of that nature. So the best practices that we have been, the experts actually, don't come close unless you have the full attire. Secondly, once you finished with the patient, even you have to take it off and have another one. That's why there have been shortage in that, is never to come near or touch the person. Physicians, of course, might also wear protective gloves and all of kind of protection gear. Secondly, some people say, why did you do the proper ghusl? This is murder. So I think somebody was saying, you can just get even a hose and start. They don't realize that maybe just one drop of water, radad, I might get into the person, nothing happens to them for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden they start getting the fever and other serious symptoms. I have seen also in one of the programs, I use a lot of this so that I connect the reality with Sharia. There were cases where people might even contract the disease from even opening the body bag, because now I think they put them in body bag and they clean it and in a way that's really, but even then using the water might be very serious. Even though, of course, you know, in traditional fiqh, if a person, for example, is decaying or something, they said it's enough just to pass some water over. I have seen myself, like especially in Italy, where it's been very, very dangerous. Sometimes they use even lifts to lift the box, or so that nobody would touch it. So this actually shows that utmost care need to be taken. And there are some jurisdictions who say that if a person is infected, number one, all those who are living with that person, for example, one's family, they should be in quarantine. Even when people in the earlier stage visit, they visit from behind a glass. But now it is quite common to keep them at least for 2 weeks, because they could be asymptomatic, that they carry the germ, but they don't have the real serious stages of it. So sometimes I find in Italy, they carry, I think it was in Italy, they use even you might say some equipment to carry the box so that nobody touch it. There have been some cases, for example, one brother was telling me that in one instance, I wouldn't say which country anyway, it's a material, because we're dealing with the subject. He said that the authorities said we cannot release the body to the family. This is quite common. Secondly, it is only released to the to a certified funeral home. And even there was some fear among people working in funeral homes because it's highly contagious. There was some cases, however, I don't know how that happened, because even if government allow it, and you know there is danger to your life, you don't take it just because they said you could do it. Usually they say don't. That they allowed the family to take the person in a box. So they had to provide them a box. And they took it in the masjid where there is ghusl facilities. So they did whatever is needed in normal cases. But that's a very, very, very serious one, because even if a government says it's okay, and there is real danger, we apply our Sharia that to avoid hurting ourselves for that. So that is the matter. As far as janazah, as you know, many countries now have limits on the number of people to gather. In our province here in Nova Scotia, at one time they said no more than 10, and then they reduce it even 5. In places where the spread is fast, they take even more precaution. Unfortunately, this is something that very sad. Because of the high infection, the people who are living with that person who contracted, they have to also be isolated. So normally they have to be to quarantine themselves for their protection and the protection of others who are not aware that they might be carrying, you know, that virus. Secondly, and I feel very sad for that, they say sometimes they don't allow them to visit their relatives. Even in early cases or some cases where they allow it, it was behind a glass door, but they're not allowed to meet with the person. Of course, as Muslim, it is very, very difficult not to be holding the hand of the deceased or make talqeen of shahada. It's very hurtful but again, it's a matter of life or death for that matter. So any practice short of really being done either by professional funeral home people who have their own equipment, and of course who are being taught now that this is not like any deceased person. It could be very, very contagious. And again, because of the limitation on number of people gathering because of the spread, it may not necessarily be the family, but maybe, or it could be not the immediate family living with the deceased, that they say only 5 or 10. Actually, in many cases, say no more than 5 persons. Now, it would be really frivolous to keep talking. No, but how could they not parade the janaza in the masjid? These are furu'. Because if you do that, even in the masjid, only few people will be allowed. And again, there could be something that happened that leave the germ also, and it could be life or death for some people. So what happens is that the closest person to the deceased, other than the one who living with him in the same residence, at the time of burial, they can do salah. In addition to that, because again, it is always desirable for us Muslims to have largest number of people possible for janazah. The community also can have Salatul Ghaib in absentia. Usually you don't have absentia, somebody prayed on them, but because of the small number, there's no harm also taking this precaution. These are contingencies that should be taken, sadly, without really full satisfaction of processing the disease. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided that for saving life.
I mean, how do you feel, Dr. Jamal? You have your health as well? Your energy is okay?
Alhamdulillah, you energized me. It is a little late here, but alhamdulillah, when I was talking to my brothers and sisters, Allah provide me out of His generosity some more.
How about for another 15 to 20 minutes is okay?
No problem, inshallah.
No problem. Allah bless you and increase your health, Ya Rab. So one of the most prolific, most famous, most important hadith books in the Sunnah tradition is Adab al-Mufrad by Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala. In this text, as you know, Dr. Jamal, there are a number of chapters where Imam al-Bukhari, he addresses the rights of a son to a non-Muslim father, a daughter to a non-Muslim mother, a Muslim to a non-Muslim brother or neighbor or relative, etc. And he has lots of very important information that every Muslim should know, especially us living in the West. My question, Allah bless you, right now our neighbors adhere to other traditions, faith-based practices. Us as Muslims, in an age where we are living in a very diverse community and everyone is being afflicted by the repercussions and hardships of this disease, how us as Muslims should our citizen manners be? How should we act with our neighbors? And how dutiful and respectful should we be of people of other faith-based in this time especially?
Okay. The most general part of your good question is normative relationship between Muslims and any other people, but more particularly, of course, people of other so-called revealed religions or Abrahamic. Some people do not like the term, but it's a common use anyway, like Jewish and Christians, regardless of their sect. Many people forget that the fundamental relationship is ruled by Surah Al-Mumtahana. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. Subhanallah. Allah does not forbid you, O Muslims, with respect to those, obviously, non-Muslims, regardless even, who did not fight you because of your religion or drive you out of your homes, that you should deal with them in birr. And birr, يعني, I think one of our pious predecessors يعني defined birr or consider birr is more than kindness. That's why the Quran used birr بالوالدين, even if they are not Muslims. So birr goes beyond even being kind, but considerate and helpful. So if people meet that, not collectively, of course. I mean, if you have a good neighbor that did not hurt you, he's entitled to birr, which is great. Well, ihsan. Now, this is the general rule, not the rule of fighting and this and that, because many people mix between Islamic teaching in relationship to your Muslim brothers and sisters, because there are additional mutual obligation in the bond of Islam, but also the teaching pertaining to your neighbor. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he speaks about being kind to your neighbor, it doesn't mean your neighbor who's a Muslim. وَالْجَارِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْجَارِ الْجُنُبِ, the neighbor, even who might be relative of yours. Al-Jar al-Junub means the one who may not share your religion, but he's living with you in peace. They take the ayat in the Quran about the context of battlefield and self-defense against oppression or trying to drive us out of our faith and so on. These two issues should not be mixed up. The Quran deals with both situations, and the ayah should be referred to in the proper context. So we're talking here about peaceful relationship with your neighbor. In some cases, even your neighbor might have done favors to you. I can speak myself. I have a neighbor here since we moved to this house in 1972, and I've seen nothing except kindness. Sometimes before I get my garbage can, if he sees it, except during these days, of course, you have to take precaution, and he does. He does that to me. I be working in the garden and he helped me with something. What do I have against him for that? And I should reciprocate. And there are many hadith speaks also, even in the Quran itself, وَالْجَارِ الْقُرْبَى وَالْجَارِ الْجُنُبِ وَالصَّاحِبِ بِالْجَنْبِ, casual, one sitting next to you. So that the foundation really is to be kind and considerate to this. But when it comes to certain legal things, whether, for example, a relative who's not a Muslim, and of course there are lots of mixed messages. Of course, the traditional position that has been taken by almost, I say almost because of good reason, universally, they said that the difference of religion bars inheritance. Bars inheritance. But if you apply that fairly, of course, it says the Muslim does not inherit from a non-Muslim and the reverse. However, there have been scholars, and one of them I'd like to mention because he's well known in the Muslim world, and he's not the only one, that he said that a Muslim should not be at a disadvantage. How? For example, if a Muslim is married to a wife, he lived with her all his life and so on, or for 50 years, husband and wife, and to say that he should be deprived of any shares is contrary to what Sheikh Badawi calls Islam should not be a disadvantage to the person. So one of his fatwas is that a Muslim can inherit. And sometimes if he's not, the money might go to some other, whatever, good or bad type of use. But there is a question, aside from this fatwa even. somebody would say, but isn't that really kind of discrimination? A Muslim inherits from a non-Muslim, but a non-Muslim cannot inherit from a Muslim? The answer to that is very simple. Islam is an integrated whole. And if we look atomistically in a certain things, that's not fair. Yet we forget also that within Sharia, you can give that non-Muslim wife even sometimes more than that other heirs. That is the wasiyah, the will. A Muslim is allowed to bequeath in his wasiyah or will something for either another person who would not inherit, and he lived with a person married to a wife for 50 years and then gets nothing, like the Arabs say, تطلع من مولد بلا حمص, يعني all nothing inherit. That's not, again, in the character of recognition of their faithfulness. So that door is open, and it should be no more than 1/3, of course, of the net after payment of debt, funeral costs, and so on. So all the remaining, you have the discretion of assigning it for any one or more persons or causes, which means theoretically, not theoretically, Sharia-wise, a wife who is not a Muslim may be entitled to, if her husband included that in his will, can take as much as 1/3 or part of that if he has signed for other causes. So that might compensate. There is no restriction so long as it's something permissible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can take it either from the standpoint of that fatwa. If not, you can take it legitimately without any question in the discretionary, no more than 1/3 of the net estate. No problem with that. And I would be inclined to that reasoning because there is no special fatwa for it. It's already there.
Allah bless you, Dr. Jamal. We'll do one more question if you don't mind.
No problem.
No problem.
One question and a half.
One question and a half.
One question and a half. Okay. Allah bless you, and thank you for taking the time.
Egyptians say كذا ونص, يعني everything they want at the نص. نص means not half of the question, maybe half of the session.
Yeah. Allah bless you, Dr. Jamal. So we look to our foundational actions in Islam, and there's the subject of Zakah, and also the subject of charity. Especially during the month of Ramadan, where Abdullah bin Abbas, he described Prophet ﷺ, أن يكون أجود من الريح المرسلة. He was very charitable and dutiful to the people, particularly in the month of Ramadan, when he used to get close to the Quran and recite it with the angelic beam known as Angel Gabriel. When we read the Quran, we come across a phrase, and this phrase in connection to charity is وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ, and the statement وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. In our times, if we want to give in charity in Ramadan, and or if we have a zakah that is an obligation upon us, and the time has passed and we have to prepare it, is it okay and is it permissible for a Muslim to spend these funds combating the coronavirus and also supporting people in the front line, and or also supporting people that are affected by the disease? Allah bless you.
Barakallah fiik. In the interpretation of وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, there are two, I don't want to use the term extreme because sometimes it might be taken negatively. There are two poles. Some people would say, literally speaking, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ means only defense of the Muslim Ummah. Okay, so you might say this is like defense. Their argument, of course, that there are many categories already. So وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ is meant with something more specific, that is the defense of the Muslim Ummah. there are those who said fi sabilillah. Well, everything is fi sabilillah. See what I mean? But again, that seemed to be a little bit of a sort of not a very authentic interpretation. If you say anything fi sabilillah, then why did the Quran specify certain categories? But we cannot go to the point of saying everything, even paying zakah, even spending on your wife is fi sabilillah, and then we take zakah away from that. You cannot give zakah, for example, to people that you're responsible for maintaining. There are those who took a middle ground. They did not open the door wide because, like I say, everything is fi sabilillah. You know, محياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له. No. So like Sheikh Badawi, for example, he said there are cases, for example, where there is a great need to do something that was not known very much in the past. For example, things to protect the well-being and health of the community. That they consider that part of it. Secondly, and be careful about that, and I should be careful about that so that I don't misquote. He said that masjid is a very important need for Muslims. The basic rule is that you don't use zakah money for building or maintaining masjid, especially our fancy masjid with chandeliers and all of that. Otherwise, there will be nothing will go for the fuqara. Okay, so he didn't go to that. Yeah, it could be interpreted in that extreme. But for example, he says, Dor Aitam, if you have like some home or house for orphans, for example. He said that if indeed the people are so poor that they can't have a simple masjid, not $7 million masjid, a simple masjid, and there was no way that anybody, for example, the rich can build it. Maybe there are not too many rich people who are really in some villages, you know, in many Muslim countries, they can hardly afford that. And there is no way that they can have even a simple masjid. Then in that case, zakah paid. So it's not an open door. And that's what I like in this wasatiyat al-Islam. You don't go to one extreme of strictness or tasayyub for that. So his opinion that could be regarded. He said, for example, Madaris al-Islami, Islamic schools. There wasn't really Islamic schools in the formal way at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now Muslim minorities might be numerical minorities. I don't like the word minority because it means less, but the term refers to numerical minorities of Muslims. They don't have an Islamic school. And without that, their children are very likely to be brainwashed with all kind of things that we all know in this society. So the Islamic school is not only to give alternative education, because they take also the government curriculum and everything, but at least Islamic atmosphere, some Islamic subjects when there are, and there is always room, as you know, in curriculum for non-compulsory courses, so they can take Arabic language to understand the Quran or Islamic studies. He said, if this is not possible to have without the money of zakah, some of the zakah could be used for that purpose. So these are all, you know, contingencies or issues that were not really very common at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is the case of hospitals, for example. I'm sure some scholars probably would not mind if you use part of that as not a very stretched fi sabilillah. So that opened the door for all kind of other type of activities.
Okay, Dr. Ana. One last question. May Allah bless you.
You too.
we're in an age of information. We're speaking to Dr. Jamal online, live. There are prayers that are conducted online live as well. Some masajid do Jum'ah of some sort online. Is it okay for a person to pray behind a virtual prayer, an online prayer, their Jum'ah prayer, for example, or the Eid prayer as it is drawing near here, God willing, at the end of the month of Ramadan?
I have been involved actually, as I mentioned earlier, with the Fiqh Council of North America, and also for many years also with the European Council of Fatwa and Research. It's not because I'm at the level of the great scholars there, but it was a good thought on their part to have one or two persons who might have experience in life in North America. So it's just the age, no matter of age and experience, because that's what I mentioned earlier. To judge a matter is a branch of your understanding of it. So perhaps they thought to have some isti'nas, a couple of cases, but otherwise they're all scholars of Sharia, not like myself who would be happy to be a student of any of them. And that the conclusion, both of Fiqh Council, in my understanding, as well as the European Council of Fatwa and Research, that they were very careful. They said we don't encourage that. And there are lots of reasons also. One of which is that why we have takalluf. You see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given us a rukhsa. For example, even in non-infectious cases, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, allowed jam' to combine Zuhr and Asr, for example, if it's too rainy or muddy. And some scholars also argued that al-asl, the original obligation of Muslim is Zuhr, and Jum'ah came later actually, and it substitutes Zuhr, but al-asl was Zuhr. And that's why, again, you find even traditional opinion of scholars that if you miss Dhuhr or could not come for some reason or the other, legitimate excuse, of course not, I was busy with my game, that if you've missed it, you don't do Jum'ah by yourself, you can pray Dhuhr instead. Furthermore, there have been instances even that the scholar said that if a person is afraid, not only for himself, for example, like a masjid is in a very far places and there might be some criminal elements there, so he fears for his life, or even they say for his money. You know, if you have a horse or something, they might take it from him. By exception, he can pray Zuhr instead. So the argument was made in both, at least in the one I attended in more details, because it was several days, the European Council of Fatwa and Research, that if we have already rukhsa in Sharia, why innovate in the matter of ibadah? I'm not saying we can accuse people of innovation, because there are some people even trying to promote that. But they also added a number of qualifiers, that this does not really qualify as jama'ah, because jama'ah is not only to hear, that ittisal al-sufuf is one thing, that the lines are connected, except for excuses that are legitimate, like in some countries where the masjid is overflowing to the point that some people might be praying in front of the imam even because of the space, or there might be a slight partition, but there is still, the lines are there, you hear the imam, you can reach the imam. So why do that? Takalluf. I come, of course, to the other arguments. So there is no precedent for that really in jurisprudence, even though that's not an excuse, because there is also tajdeed in details. That's why they didn't use a language that says haram to do it. But I was more impressed by the argument that says, why go in khayal, number one, when Allah has allowed you to pray for contingencies like this, which is important, saving life even, why don't you just pray Zuhr with your family on Friday? Secondly, there are innovative ways also that we can use technology. For example, instead of the khutbah of Jum'ah, and now that you can record from your home, so the Imam doesn't have to go to the masjid even, so that people say, yeah, how come the Imam and another muezzin have access to them? And it's dangerous also for them, who knows? And you cannot have disinfection. You have to remove all, if you want to use the masjid, you have to remove the carpets, all of it, and have just like tiles, which would be extremely costly. You have to disinfect it each and every time somebody pray there. And even then, if somebody sneezes and you're in great trouble. So they say there is that substitute. Of course, I raised that question actually myself with my community here, even before the councils looked into. I said, can we find some way that people feel grieved, really, are no less grieved than those who says, oh, go pray, tawakkal ala Allah, and then you get many people infected, haram, and some of them will die even eventually. I said, is there any way that we can use the internet, for example, or other methods like Zoom, whatever, to let the Imam in his house even give some kind of lesson? But European Council was a little cautious on that he said it doesn't have to be like khutbah. And then he can tell them, give his lesson, and he say, now you can pray Zuhr with your family. I find that something which is more direct, more transparent, without going in circle. One aspect that to be considered in a fatwa like that, that impressed me in the discussion in the European Council, it said that one danger of that some people might say, all right, if I have already prayed in my house comfortably, listen to the lesson and allow it to pray Zuhr, just stretch that rukhsa that's only for contingency, and may later on, what is the difference between that and Jum'ah? I don't have to go to Jum'ah. I can hear the khatib from the masjid, bath al-mubashir, direct feed. I'm not saying everybody might do that, but there are some mahadir in doing it. And personally, I prefer the legitimate, non-controversial bits. Now, if you go to some community, and I know some community in California, without giving names, are going to promote this notion of virtual salah. And somebody else might say also, okay, why don't you broadcast other salawat? So nahjur al-masjid, khalas, masjid becomes really marginalized. So again, to be very careful, I don't think either council said it is haram. But basically, they took the position that we have a straightforward substitute for that. If Jum'ah, you don't hear Jum'ah in the masjid, you hear a lesson. It could be like Jum'ah, but not to say this is the khutbah. And then you pray with your family. And the same applied to Taraweeh, they said also, by the way. He said, it is better actually just to pray Taraweeh at home. But some people say, but we don't listen to the beautiful recitation. I don't know if I mentioned that, and I'm an old man, sometimes I forget. Did I say that you could have like half an hour recitation of the Quran from the muqri'in, from their homes, even one or two? Or one idea I'm thinking about, even if you go to the internet and get some of the best reciters also. We need reciters, alhamdulillah, in every community that are beautiful reciters, but once in a while you get from internet, hopefully one without commercials. This is the thing. There are some, I know, so I have to choose it carefully. And you get some of the muqri'in like Minshawi, Abdul Basit, Abdul Samad. So you have a variety. but just before Isha. And once that the tilawah is finished, about half an hour before Isha time, and you can just tell people, now you can pray your Taraweeh, Isha and Taraweeh in Jama'ah. Some people say, but if there is no Hafiz of the Quran, okay, there is no problem with that, because in Hadith, we find that Aisha radiallahu anha mentioned that a man was used to lead them in prayer. Okay, وَكَانَ يَقْرَأُ مِنَ الْمُصْحَفِ. He was reading from Mus'haf. That's, of course, for Sunnah, there is more relaxation here about reading from the Mus'haf. So there is variety of ways to enjoy Ramadan as best as we can, whether it is tilawah or, listening at home, reciters.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jamal al-Badawi. It was a pleasure having you and having this conversation with you, and you allowing us from your hectic schedule to spend time with us as communities and as brothers and sisters. It is always a pleasure to see you. May you have many years of blessed health and intellect and charitable deeds for the communities at large. Thank you very much for that.
Jazakumullah khair. May Allah accept it from all of us and remember us in your dua. Barakallahu fikum jami'an.
Will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. Brothers and sisters listening from across the United States and in Oregon, wherever you may be, it was a pleasure having you on. Until we meet again, do not forget the MET's efforts. And as you know, these type of community events require support from brothers and sisters with the like-mindedness for the growth and betterment of society. The MET works on behalf of people in need. It reaches out, it educates the masses, and it looks to brighten the future for everyone. Don't forget them in your charitable deeds and your acts. The month of Ramadan is at hand. Until we meet again, don't forget us in your prayers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dr. Jamal Badawi, thank you very much in our behalf here.
تقبل الله منا ومنكم يا أخي. الله يكرمك.
Inshallah. And Dr. Yusuf, thank you very much for your moderation. Dr. Jamal Badawi, we love you and you are always in our prayers.
Allah yabarak fikum. I love you too all, and I feel very bad that I'm not traveling by choice since January 16th.
May Allah bless you, inshallah. All the sisters and the brothers, they give their love and respect for you.
Barakallahu fikum. Shakarallahu lakum jami'an. Same here.
I mean, for our audience, May the 9th at 2:30 Pacific Standard Time, we are having Sister Anila Afzali from Seattle. And then on May the 10th, we're having Dr. Hassan Lashab of Taysir Seminary from Knoxville on Sunday at 2 o'clock. So stay tuned. Thank you, Dr. Jamal Badawi again.
You're welcome, ya. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much, everybody.
You're welcome.